well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking with Mike Harris of the Gun Owners Action League in Massachusetts as the state Senate inches closer to unleashing its own gun control bill. You know, the House played their shenanigans really all last summer and last fall with their carry killer legislation, right? So bad that in unanimous opposition from the Massachusetts Police Chiefs Association, obviously from gun owners across the state as well, they pulled back the bill, they reintroduced the bill, new bill number, changed bill number I think 3 different times before they passed it. Still were never able to get the support of groups like the Gun Owners Action League or police chiefs in the state of Massachusetts, but they did pass their own anti-gun bill, but the state Senate is not taking it up. They're crafting their own measure. I will say, they're being more deliberative. That doesn't mean it's going to be a better bill when they finally release it, but apparently they are getting close. The self-imposed deadline is the end of January. It could get pushed back, I suppose, and fingers crossed that it does, because the longer it takes for them to introduce this bill, then the less time they have to actually pass it. But let's get an update from Mike Harris with the Gun Owners Action League. He's been paying very close attention, talking to lawmakers as the sausage is being made. Take a look and a listen. Mike, Happy New Year to you, sir. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, you too, Cam. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I think you're the last person I'm going to say Happy New Year to, because it is like almost mid-January now. But it is the first time of 2024 that I've had a chance to speak with you. And saw a story in the Boston Herald a couple of days ago about how the Senate's gun control bill is starting to take shape, right? Senate Democrats getting a handle on the gun reform bill. They say that this is going to be unleashed by the end of the month. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what we've been told since like November-ish. Like after the House pulled their shenanigans, it took like a week or two for the Senate to kind of respond and say, "Ooh, we're not going to do that, but we are going to do something, and we'll have it out." I think originally they said end of December, and then they kind of got partway through it and said, this is a little more complicated than we thought. Let's push to January. So, let's
imagine
what a month does.
Massachusetts bill is complicated when it comes to guns. It might be because you all have so many laws already on the books, right? It is this sort of house of cards that has been stacked up over the decades. Yeah. So what are you hearing about what's going to be in the Senate bill?
So I actually kind of made some notes for that. So we don't really have any solid information exactly of what they're going to do, black and white policy wise. But the kind of the ideas that they're going for are kind of they're looking for information about ghost guns, quote unquote, parts. They want to reinforce the pistol rosters and all that stuff. So they're kind of going after people who are doing Glock transfers and that kind of stuff. Because right now in Massachusetts, a frame or receiver is not considered a gun until it can fire a projectile. So even though federally it's considered a frame or receiver is considered a firearm, in Massachusetts it's not. So I think they're they throw the word loophole around a lot, but it's just the way the law is written. And that's kind of one of the things they're going to go after. So it's parts kits, ghost guns, increased training requirements. I don't think they're going to go quite as far as the House did. But I think we're probably going to see live fire, which is just silly. We can get into that in a minute too, if you want to talk about that. That's a whole can of worms. Yeah. And then the other thing that we're really hearing about is red flags and mental health stuff, which is fine. I mean, we're not in favor of red flag bills, obviously. We think the whole process is not everybody likes to say unconstitutional, but I like to say that it's not constitutionally defined yet, because the term due process is also thrown around a lot, and due process is kind of I'm not going to say it's a subjective standard, but it kind of is, in the fact that each type of penalty or proceeding is given its own due process. So if a higher court determines that certain parts of the red flag or, that kind of process is okay, then I guess it's okay. It's kind of what the courts are for. But, we haven't had that type of a higher court definition given to us yet. So right now we're still fighting the fight.
Well, and, red flag laws, I think, are, look, one of the reasons why they're popular among gun control groups is because they are based on, orders of protection, domestic violence orders, and things that, again, we might say don't have a whole lot of due process, but it's based on a system that's been upheld in the law, right? So that's why they sort of, okay, well, let's tweak this. And that way, hopefully this will stand.
Right.
We are seeing challenges to red flag laws. There's a lawsuit in Maryland filed by the Second Amendment Foundation that I think has a really good chance, in part because of the way the Maryland law is written. But we've also seen the abuses. When I think about due process, I think about things not only like ex parte hearings where the subject of the petition is completely unaware that this hearing is taking place.
Yeah, Fifth Amendment issues.
Right. But you also look at, red flag laws are civil in nature. They're not criminal. So if you can't afford an attorney, you're on your own in most states. There have been some states that have actually said, okay, listen, yes, you do have access to a public defender, which is, again, a good step in terms of maintaining due process. But there are a lot of issues, when you got to get into the details of these things, right? So when you're talking about something language we haven't seen yet, I don't expect you to object, at least object in theory to red flag laws, absolutely. But the devil's in the details here. So I think we are going to have to wait.
Applying 50 different standards to the deprivation of a federally protected civil right or constitutionally protected civil right is a big deal. That's a problem. That's something that is going to have to be defined at some point or just thrown out. And one of the things that we took exception with, or huge exception with, in the version of the House bill was it just expanded the list of who could file a red flag law. Anything from like your boss at work to a next door neighbor or a school principal, like stuff like that. It was kind of, or even a teacher. It was nuts. So we took huge exception to the expansion of that, and then just the ability for somebody to just kind of just throw this around and just use it as a weapon just became a huge red flag for us about it.
Right. Well, and it's interesting to me to see how the rhetoric around red flags have shifted from the part of the gun control lobby, right? So when let's say 5 years ago, it was sort of like listening to Democrats talk about abortion in the 1990s, right? It should be safe, legal, and rare. So yes, we should have this process, but it's only for extraordinary circumstances. And over the last couple of years, it's been, well, these aren't being used enough, right? So as you say, we're going to expand the pool of who can. So the question then becomes, okay, well, how many red flag petitions do you think should be issued in any given year?
Exactly.
Because it seems to me like you're right. This has gone from a tool that will only be rarely deployed in the most, egregious of circumstances to something that, Kathy Hochul, for example, in New York has told the New York State Police, listen, every time you think that, you can use this order, we want you to apply for an IRPA order, to the point that, the New York State Police at one point was like, listen, we don't have officers. You got to make a decision, Governor. Right? Do you want us to go out and do our job and make arrests, or do you want us to be in court testifying in all of these red flag cases?
It's huge.
So this is a big issue, but I don't want to dwell on this too much. I do want to go back to the live fire component, because this is something we know is in the House bill. Did you say it sounds like some version of this is going to be in the Senate bill?
That's what we're told.
Okay. So I know why this is problematic. I'm pretty sure our audience knows why this is problematic, but tell me in your words, Mike, why this is problematic.
So in Massachusetts, it's kind of uniquely problematic in so far that we do not have public ranges in Massachusetts. They don't exist. I can think off the top of my head across the entire state, we have about 4 for-profit ranges that you can go and rent range time. I think there's 4. There's one in Chelmsford. There's one in down the Cape. There's one in Attleboro, and there's one in like Holliston, and they're all in the eastern part of the state, every single one of them. And I can't think of anywhere else where you can even do that. So that means the rest of the gun ranges are private clubs that are operated by a board and are privately owned and are subject to, their own restrictions as far as, membership numbers go, capacity issues, balancing training rental of the ranges to up against the members who pay to using them, and all the way down to just capacity issues of how many people can be members.
Right.
So in Massachusetts, like I said, it's kind of a unique issue where are you going to do this live fire training? Where is it going to happen? The most at Goal, we encourage live fire training when you go and take your class for your license. We don't recommend any classes where you don't do that. However, mandating it on the state level it's a financial burden. It's a time commitment. It's a matter of finding a place to go to do it. And and especially in the city, we've started to kind of expand our reach into the city, and we've found that there's a huge contingency of the population in the city that don't own vehicles or don't have a way to get to a gun range out in like Webster, Massachusetts, to go and take live fire training if they can't get out there. So and there's none of these facilities within the city limits of Boston. And if you think for a half a second that the city council will grant a zoning petition to someone who wants to open up a gun range inside the city limits, I'll sell you all the bridges in town. I mean, it's not going to happen. So, it's just another hurdle for people who want to exercise their Second Amendment rights and will not get to do so because of, this brand new arbitrary requirement on them. They make the argument all the time that it's like driving a car and you don't get your license until you have so many driving hours and all this stuff. It's like, well, we say this until we're blue in the face. Driving a car is not protected in the Constitution. It's not there. I haven't found it. So
right.
No, it's just a different standard.
Well, and so this issue has popped up in Washington, D.C. as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because there is a range time requirement, and there are no ranges in Washington, D.C. So same issue, right? If you live in the District of Columbia and you want to get a concealed carry license, you've got to go to Maryland, you've got to go to Virginia. And again, if you're relying on public transportation,
I'd like to see somebody petition to use the Hoover building. You want me to get this so bad? Let me use your facility.
Right. Well, so that is actually, I think, a valid suggestion. Maybe not the Hoover building, although it'd be great to see. But, again, if you're going to tell me that I have to take this course and I have to go through all of this, then you need to provide me with a location where I can do so. Because otherwise, again, this to me seems to be an impermissible barrier, as you say, to exercising this right. We're going to make it as hard as possible for you to get the training because we know that there are, let's call it a range desert in Massachusetts, right?
That's a good way. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I'm going to steal that from you.
Okay,
Graham,
please do. Please do. And so we know that this is happening. Massachusetts, unfortunately, is not the leader in this. We've seen this before. And you're absolutely right. Look, I encourage live fire training as well. I think we all do as gun owners.
It's part of being a responsible gun owner.
Absolutely.
That's part of it.
But, it's one thing to be able to say, I'm going out to my buddy's farm. We're going to do some shooting this weekend. A lot of us may have access to a location like that.
Right.
But that's not considered formal firearm instruction under the state of Massachusetts, right?
Not at all.
So, and I got to ask too, along with the live fire provision that is rumored to be in the Senate bill, we've seen a huge issue in California right now with SB 2. They changed the training requirements, right? And so all of a sudden now USCCA instructors no longer allowed to teach classes, NRA certified instructors no longer allowed to teach classes. And so now you've got this huge bottleneck of people who are applying for their concealed carry license, but can't get the training because the state has thrown up, again, that type of barrier. Are you hearing any rumors, or was there anything in the House bill that would cause this same type of effect in Massachusetts?
Yes, but not to the same degree. I always find this hilarious that the state, all these politicians demonize the hell out of the NRA and, all these organizations. But in the law right now, you have to be an NRA certified instructor to do this. It's just funny. That's the standard. We didn't see them remove that per se, in the House version, but they did modify it so that the curriculum had to be approved and parallelly, oh, I don't even know how to say the word, like put together with the state. So in the House bill, we saw all kinds of crazy stuff, like I think we talked about it before. They had a provision that said you had to have active shooter training and de-escalation training and all this kind of stuff. And, a lot of that stuff, we were like, this is insane. This is like thousands of dollars worth of training. This is nuts. Like your $100 class is about to turn into like $100 4-hour class is about to turn into like 12 hours and $1,200. It's wild. So, we've seen that stuff. Just because it's in the House bill doesn't mean it's going to be in the Senate bill.
Right.
There's still a question of what they're going to conference in and out, or if they even can. But that's another discussion altogether.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, when the Senate bill drops, we'll have you back and talk about how the sausage is getting made here. Yeah.
One thing I did want to mention to you though, going back before we get past it, when the Bruin decision came out, I got real irritated with Justice Kavanaugh. Because his concurrent opinion is what they've been citing over and over again, where they're talking about how, a licensing scheme is allowed by the Supreme Court. They said it's okay for us to do this, so everyone should have it. But in the same breath, they also said it should not. If you're going to establish a licensing scheme with such a barrier to the exercise of a civil right, then you have to make it followable, or for lack of a better way to say it in my brain at the moment, they have to make it doable and not prohibitive. So I think there's a challenge to be mounted to a lot of this stuff on those grounds, on that precedent, where we're seeing such maybe not so much like on their face egregious oversteps, but just things where in reality they the unintended or intended, if you want to be cynical about it, consequences of these new provisions make them unfollowable or untenable for average people.
I think that's right. I mean, and Kavanaugh talks specifically about lengthy wait times or exorbitant fees. But that to me doesn't mean that those are the only types of things, right? Again,
including
access.
But not limited to. Yeah,
right, exactly. And we get back to the range access issue. That is another barrier, right? So you can have a shall issue system in theory, but again, if it's nearly impossible for an applicant to get access to a range to go through the live fire training, well, I would say that's an impermissible burden. Thankfully,
versus reality,
right? And I know the First Circuit, Court of Appeals, Massachusetts, all the way across the country from the Ninth Circuit, but in some ways, I think it's helpful that California has decided to screw with the rights of gun owners so badly because a lot of this stuff is already being litigated. You've got the lawsuit against the LA County Sheriff's Department and I think Laverne, California, going after these egregious fees, $1,000 or more to apply for a concealed carry license with all of the fees and other add-ons. I think it's a 2-year-long wait in Los Angeles County for a lot of folks right now to get their carry license. So, the good news is I think some of these issues are already going to be litigated. And if it gets to that point in Massachusetts, hopefully you'll be able to have some good court decisions to point to and say, look, these courts have already said this is wrong. Yeah. But it's always better to stop a bad bill than to try to go after and overturn a bad law. And
that's why we exist.
Exactly. Right. And so I think now the focus has to be on stopping this awful language from being enshrined into law.
Right.
Again, don't know what the Senate bill is ultimately going to look like. Maybe in a couple of weeks we will. I thought it was interesting that the Senate President, Cynthia Cream,
she's not the Senate President. She's the head of the working group for the bill.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Senate Majority Leader, Cindy Cream, and head of the working group, had told reporters that the House did their version. She said, I've just been in touch with different groups to hear their ideas, and I've been meeting with mostly all members. So this is the Senate's bill. What members of the Senate think they want in a bill. So I'm reading between the lines a little bit here, Mike, but it seems like there's still maybe some headbutting between the House and the Senate on this issue, which I think is beneficial for gun owners.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had conversations with senators who are not on our side.
Yeah.
That have looked at the way the House went about doing their whatever you want to call, if you want to call it a process, and have said, this is ridiculous. I don't care. I've said this a whole bunch of times to everyone who wants to listen to me too. I don't care. I don't really care how you feel about guns and the Second Amendment and the culture in this country. It's considered a civil right by a lot of people. It's enshrined in the Constitution, and it's a controversial issue. It deserved a lot more than goofy legislative dirty tricks.
Yeah.
Where they hollow out, they take a time machine and hollow out an old budget bill, stuff this language in there, and force House Ways and Means to shove it on the floor and skip half the legislative process in the House. It's wild,
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about that before too. But the way the House did this is just insane. I mean,
yeah,
and we've had a lot of people look at us and say that anybody I describe that process to, who's not kind of dug deep into this stuff, looks at me like I have a million heads and says they're allowed to do that. I'm like, yeah, they can do that with one of the rules is that you can suspend the rules, and they did that a whole bunch of times in the process, and it's legal, but
right. I mean, again, you talk about how the sausage it gets made.
Exactly.
It's kind of like dropping live kittens into the right. It's just as awful as that.
Yeah.
That's what we saw the House version come about, and it really is insane.
Yeah.
All right, listen, we're going to have you back in a couple of weeks
Sure.
Because I do want to talk when the Senate bill actually drops. But what is your advice to gun owners in the meantime? Should they be keeping their powder dry? Should they be contacting their senators right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So contact your senators now before the bill comes out. Another thing that we have to worry about kind of in the periphery, and I'm sorry, I know you might be running a little late here, but we're also a little worried that Governor Healy could possibly use the recently announced revenue shortfalls to kind of leverage votes on this bill, depending on what it looks like. She is superiorly anti-gun. She's huge. I mean, she did her stuff in 2016 where she reinterpreted the assault weapons ban. But the governor can make what are called 9C cuts in Massachusetts, and it's a unilateral budget cut where they can apply them to programs that are under the executive branch. And that sounds benign on its face, but that means like parks programs and stuff in local communities. So I can think of 38 House districts right now that are looking down the barrel of some cuts. But depending on what the Senate comes up with, I don't know, not to be craven and cynical about it, the governor could use that to her advantage. But I don't know. I would tell people in the state to contact your senator, tell them to stay strong. Even in the face of this kind of stuff, tell them how you feel. Same thing as the House. Just keep at it.
Well,
that's the signs up there.
Yeah. And listen, when you're talking about anti-gun politicians, I think you have to be cynical. I think you have,
absolutely,
because we're not talking about folks. Again, I mean, we talked about this just a couple minutes ago. These are folks who refuse to recognize a constitutional right, even if it's one they don't like. They don't have to like it. It's still there in the Constitution, right? They still have to respect that right. That's what they're supposed to do. And they are, just ignoring their oath to protect and defend the Constitution and this right. So, no, I think it's okay to be cynical. Like, as much of an eternal optimist as I am, I think it's probably smart to be cynical when we're dealing with anti-gun politicians like Maura Healey. Mike, as always, man, I really appreciate you joining us on the program. Love having these conversations. Looking forward to the next one. Fingers crossed that the Senate bill is not completely awful, but I either way, we know this is not going to be good news for gun owners. So we will have much more to talk about in the near future. Mike Harris from the Gun Owners Action League, goal.org. If you are a Massachusetts gun owner, please visit the website. Please become a member and get involved. And Mike, look forward to doing this again very soon, man.
You too. Thanks a lot, Cam. Appreciate it.
My thanks to Mike for joining us on the program. And looking forward to having him back again here very soon, hopefully with some not egregiously awful news to discuss. Right now, speaking of egregiously awful news, let's turn to today's recidivist report. We'll get to our good deed of the day and our armed citizen story as well. But this one's just absolutely heartbreaking. Headline from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune: probation, no prison for a central Minnesota man who inflicted severe brain injuries to his baby. If the father abides by probation, the conviction will be reduced from a felony to a misdemeanor. I mean, that headline just makes your stomach hurt, doesn't it? 28-year-old Andrew Erickson, sentenced yesterday in Crow Wing County District Court to 5 years probation after pleading guilty to first-degree assault in connection with his violent actions towards his daughter, Gracie, on the 4th of July weekend last year when she was just 3.5 months old. 2 days after that assault at a Minneapolis hospital, Erickson told a sheriff's investigator that he had dropped his daughter. He then told the deputies, okay, I might have shaken her 5 or 6 times before I dropped her. And then he said, okay, maybe it was closer to 9 or 10 times. I don't know why on earth a prosecutor would even offer a plea deal when you've got a confession like that. But that is, in fact, what happened in Crow Wing County District Court. Judge Eric Askegaard, again, sentencing Erickson to 5 years probation for this, following the terms of the plea agreement between the defense and the prosecution. The conviction, again, not only resulted in 5 years probation, but if Erickson successfully completes the terms of that probation, then the felony conviction for shaking his daughter and leaving her with severe brain injuries will be reduced from a felony down to a misdemeanor. He's got to pay $50,000 restitution, cannot have any contact with his daughter, has to stay away from illicit drugs and alcohol, has to receive counseling from a licensed therapist, all of which, again, is great. But even the defense attorney noted that this sentence was a downward departure from the state guidelines, which call for a term of at least 7 years and 2 months behind bars. Now, of course, the defense attorney, Ryan Gary, happy that his client got that downward departure. I'm sure he's going to, be able to use that when he's getting more clients. He said the parties worked very hard to orchestrate an equitable plea agreement, given the obvious difficult nature of this case. Equitable to whom? Equitable to whom? The baby's mom, Gabrielle Palacio, told the sheriff's investigator she and her 2 sisters had spent July 3rd swimming and relaxing before they went to Brainerd, Minnesota to hang out, leaving Erickson behind to look after Gracie and her 2 siblings. Erickson called Palacio that night. He said Gracie was, quote, breathing funny and acting weird. So she raced home and arrived as her daughter was being put into an ambulance. Sheriff's deputy arrived about 9:30 that night as well after a report of a baby having trouble breathing. Gracie was admitted to Children's Hospital in Minneapolis, where she was determined to have extensive brain damage, various other injuries to her spine. And a nurse said that the injuries were inconsistent with Erickson's contention that the child fell during a diaper change. I'm so angry about this. And I realize, we can get angry about every one of these stories that I do with these recidivist reports. And time again, you see these individuals who are cut breaks. Now, in this case, Mr. Erickson, I guess not a true recidivist. There's no indication that he has any prior criminal history. But even for a first offense, a little girl left with lifelong injuries, 3.5 months old. When Erickson walks away, let's say he completes the terms of his probation. 5 years from now, is his daughter going to have recovered from her injuries? Doesn't sound like it. No, she is sentenced to a life of these injuries. And her father, the one who subjected her to those injuries, won't do a damn day behind bars. Again, it is enough to make you sick. All right, let's try to move on here. Today's armed citizen story from my old stomping grounds in Oklahoma City, where a car dealership owner shot and killed a customer in self-defense, according to police. This happened on the city's southwest side, a part of the city I knew very well. It's where I grew up. Southwest 29th Street Motors was the location. Officers found the 55-year-old victim, identified as Marvin Thomas, who was deceased when they arrived at the business. An investigation revealed that Thomas was in a, quote, altercation with the owner of 29th Street Motors. The owner shot Thomas when the customer began swinging a knife, according to authorities. Police say the owner not arrested. Sergeant Dylan Quirk telling KOCO Channel 5 in Oklahoma City that the initial argument was over some business dealing of some sort. Police say currently it appears that this is a case of self-defense, but it will be presented to the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office. KSCO reported it is the second incident in recent months that required a police presence at the business. In November, a customer was arrested after threatening somebody else at the dealership as well, which don't know how long the owner of 29th Street Motors has been carrying on the job, but after a customer was arrested for threatening a worker there, might have been why he decided to do so while he was on the clock. We'll keep our eyes open for any more details on that investigation and the results of the DA's findings. But again, as of right now, Oklahoma City Police do consider this to be a case of self-defense. Interestingly enough, I wrote about this story briefly at Bearing Arms yesterday and coupled it with yesterday's armed citizen story from Oakland, California. And in the course of doing my research on the Oklahoma City story, I found something that I found it very surprising. I found it even more surprising that this isn't talked about more. California supposedly has the best gun laws in the country, right? So, and supposedly it should have a much lower violent crime rate, let's say in Oakland than in Oklahoma City, which is constitutional carry, which has no waiting periods, no universal background checks, nothing of the sort, no red flag law. And yet, Oakland, California, with a population roughly 250,000 less than Oklahoma City, had twice the number of homicides last year. All of the gun control laws in place, 10-day waiting period, red flag law, bans on so-called assault weapons, bans on so-called large capacity magazines, right? Bans on gun shows, bans on marketing to minors, ghost gun bans. I mean, you name it, California's got it. And there were 126 homicides in Oakland, California last year. There were 74 in Oklahoma City. There actually would have been 67, but there was a change in Oklahoma law. So if you sell fentanyl to somebody and they die as a result of that, you're now charged with murder. So if you take away the fentanyl-related homicides, and I don't necessarily know why you would, but you get down to 67 homicides. So less than half of the homicides in Oakland, California. And in Oklahoma City, about 687,000 people. So about 250,000 more residents in Oklahoma City than in Oakland, and a homicide rate that is roughly half that of the California city. I found that interesting. Obviously, it completely negates and rebuts the argument from gun control advocates that, more guns equals more crime, and of course, more gun laws equals less crime. Not the case when you compare those two cities. All right, finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Not everybody is well, I'm not going to go back to our recidivist report. I'm just going to try to move on. Good Samaritan rescues driver from burning car after crash in Memorial Heights. This in the Houston, Texas area. Happened, I think it was just yesterday, or I guess maybe, Tuesday night, late Tuesday night. So really just a few hours ago from when I'm recording this. Investigators on the scene said it appeared the man crashed his vehicle into two parked cars, and then his vehicle burst into flames. The Good Samaritan, Harjip Singh, says he was watching television and he heard what sounded like an explosion. Obviously, you speeding car smashing into two other vehicles. Yeah, he said, I got out here as fast as I could. I opened the front door. I got my brother's help and his legs were stuck. So we were tugging and finally just pulled him out. The driver taken to a local hospital. Again, the car was on fire when Singh and his brother rescued the driver where he was pinned from that vehicle. His condition unknown at this point. Police haven't said what might have led to the crash. But again, that Samaritan taken to the hospital at least breathing and alive, which likely would not have been the case were it not for the quick thinking and fast actions of Harjip Singh and his brother there in Houston, Texas. So in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. We thank you for your very, very good deed. Now, that is all the time we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I am going to try to do a little mental hygiene, scrub my brain of that recidivist report story that we talked about earlier today. We will see you here tomorrow, though, with more of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Don't forget to check out bearingarms.com. In the meantime, we are, again, keeping you up to date on everything going on with your right to keep and bear arms. If you like what you see in our reporting, I would encourage you to go to bearingarms.com/subscribe. Use the promo code GUNRIGHTS to become a VIP or VIP Gold member. Not only will you get exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, but you will get that warm, fuzzy feeling of knowing that you are supporting the independent pro-segment journalism that we're doing. And thank you very much for that support. All right. Enjoy the rest of your Hump Day Wednesday. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.